Authoritarian movements have long understood the power of aesthetics, from the monumental neoclassicism of Nazi Germany to the militarized spectacles of Mussolini's Italy. Fascist regimes have used architecture, fashion, and propaganda to project strength, unity, and ideological purity. Their leaders, clad in meticulously designed uniforms, surrounded themselves with statuesque elites and choreographed displays of order and discipline. And then there's MAGA.
USA! 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 Yes!
Instead of sweeping marble monuments, it offers gaudy gold-plated hotels. Instead of polished state propaganda, it delivers Photoshop memes and AI-generated warrior Trump portraits. Its leaders don't invoke Roman emperors or Prussian generals, but awkward billionaires, reality TV stars, and Twitter trolls in red trucker hats. While the movement shares some thematic DNA with past authoritarian ideologies, nationalism, leader worship, and mass spectacle, its aesthetics are an entirely different beast, chaotic, commercialized, and often downright tacky. So what does this tell us about MAGA? Is its lack of aesthetic discipline a weakness, or has it simply adapted authoritarian imagery to the age of reality TV and internet culture? By comparing MAGA's visual culture with historical examples, we can better understand how its lack of coherence both sets it apart from classical fascism and fuels its populist appeal. Fascism at its core is a far-right ultra-nationalist ideology that emphasizes authoritarian rule, mass mobilization, and the supremacy of the state over individual freedoms. It typically involves a cult of personality, militarism, suppression of opposition, and an emphasis on order, hierarchy, and loyalty. While fascism varies depending on the country and leader, it is consistently marked by a deep obsession with aesthetics. Controlling the visual landscape is crucial to controlling the narrative. Fascist regimes throughout history have used aesthetics as a tool of ideological reinforcement. Grand architecture conveys permanence, power, and imperial dominance, while uniform spectacles symbolize order and unity. Propaganda art idealizes the leader and nation. Militarization of fashion turns clothing into political statements, and state-controlled media ensures a disciplined and polished aesthetic. By shaping everything from public spaces to individual appearances, fascist regimes turn aesthetics into a form of control. In contrast to historical examples, MAGA's aesthetic is strikingly undisciplined. Let's compare. Authoritarian leaders have long understood the importance of personal aesthetics in cultivating an image of power. Historical strongmen such as Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, and Saddam Hussein maintained a carefully controlled visual presence that emphasized physical strength, discipline, and grandeur. Their appearances were meticulously curated, militarized uniforms or sharply tailored suits projecting a sense of order and command. Their body language was equally deliberate. Mussolini's puffed-out chest and aggressive gesturing, Hitler's rigid and obsessive control over his own image, Saddam's calculated and steely presence in propaganda. Each leader presented themselves not merely as rulers but as embodiments of their nation's ideological purity and might. In contrast, Donald Trump's aesthetic is far less polished, embracing a more commercialized, even chaotic image. His ill-fitting suits, garishly long red tie, orange tan, and exaggerated hand do not project the controlled discipline of historical fascist leaders, but instead reinforce his persona as a blue-collar billionaire. Unlike past authoritarians who work to project an almost mythic invulnerability, Trump leans into his flaws, his hair, his weight, his unpolished speech, transforming them into populist credentials.
Excuse me, these massive screens that we paid a fortune for, I'm just looking at the back of my head. Is it getting a little thin? I'm not happy. I don't like that. I'm looking at these big, beautiful screens. We used to pay so much to rent them. I said it's a lot cheaper to buy them. So they're pretty nice. But
his aesthetic is not one of order and grandeur, but of defiance against elite refinement. His casual stance, frequent golfing, and lack of physical discipline signal that his appeal is not rooted in personal strength, but in his ability to channel resentment against traditional power structures. This populist deviation from the traditional strongman aesthetic finds a modern parallel in Rodrigo Duterte's rule in the Philippines. Duterte, like Trump, carefully crafted an image that distanced himself from the political elites, opting for a rugged, unfiltered persona over the polished aesthetics of traditional authoritarian figures. He often appeared in casual clothing, reinforcing the idea that he was an everyday man, rather than an untouchable ruler. But while Trump's aesthetic is largely confined to crassness and commercial excess, Duterte went further, weaponizing violence as a spectacle. His brutal drug war was much an aesthetic project as it was policy, with images of dead bodies in the street, police raids, and extrajudicial killings serving as visual manifestation of his iron-fisted rule. The fear generated by these displays became a part of his governing style, ensuring that his authority was not just known but seen. Both Trump and Duterte use humour and vulgarity as tools of connection, creating what Ashele Mbembe describes in On the Post-Colony as intimate tyranny, a relationship in which authoritarian figures do not just rule over the people but engage with them in a form of conviviality. This tactic humanizes their power, making it feel personal and familiar rather than distant and oppressive. Rather than adhering to the cold, intimidating aesthetics of past fascists, they embrace an informal, at times crude public presence, making their authority appear more organic. Duterte in particular exemplifies what Vicente Raphael calls the sovereign trickster in his article, The Sovereign Trickster, Death and Laughter in the Age of Duterte. Duterte's public persona thrives on vulnerability and vengeance. He frequently plays the role of the crude, self-depreciating figure, joking about his health, sexual prowess, or personal limitations, only to follow such moments with brutal declarations of power such as threats to kill criminals or rape jokes directed at political opponents. His ability to oscillate between affability and menace allows him to consolidate power while maintaining an image of relatability. Trump operates in a similar vein. His off-the-cuff comments, self-depreciating humour, and frequent use of nicknames for opponents create a sense of informality that shields him from the conventional political critique. Like Duterte, he embraces an aesthetic of imperfection, using humour to transform weaknesses into strengths. His supporters, much like Duterte's, view his vulgarity and unpredictability not as liabilities but as proof of his authenticity. Both leaders then represent a shift in authoritarian aesthetics, where historical fascists relied on disciplined image to project invulnerability. Trump and Duterte weaponized their flaws, using crass humour and public spectacle to create a sense of personal connection with their audiences. This strategy allows them to maintain power not through an illusion of perfection, but through the illusion of intimacy. In doing so, they rewrite the traditional playbook on authoritarian aesthetics, trading grandeur for familiarity and military precision for spectacle. Authoritarian regimes have long used architecture to symbolize their permanence and dominance. Fascist leaders saw monumental structures as a way to etch their power into the physical landscape for centuries. Nazi Germany's colossal government buildings, designed by Albert Speer, were meant to project an eternal Reich. Mussolini's Roman-inspired constructions blended classical grandeur with fascist ideology, reinforcing his claim to Italy's imperial past. Japanese imperial aesthetics blended Western authoritarian influences with deep-rooted national mysticism. Tokyo's government buildings reflected a hybrid of Japanese imperial tradition and Western fascist grandeur. Saddam Hussein's many statues and palaces served as omnipresent reminders of his rule, ensuring that his image loomed over every aspect of Iraqi life. These structures were not just buildings, they were ideological statements designed to communicate invincibility and absolute power. Trump's architectural aesthetic stands in stark contrast. His buildings prioritize branding over legacy, designed less for permanence than for immediate spectacle. Trump Tower, while sleek, lacks the monumental ambition of traditional authoritarian architecture. His casinos, golf courses, and real estate developments, dripping with gold-plated excess, favour glitz over durability. Many have fallen into disrepair and several have gone bankrupt, a reflection not of timeless power, but of capitalism's disposable nature. Unlike historical fascists who sought to construct empires that would last thousands of years, Trump's movement operates in the realm of media cycles, where dominance is measured in headlines rather than concrete and steel. MAGA does not need a rice stack or pantheon. It needs viral moments and perpetual controversy to stay relevant. Despite this, there have been attempts to give Trump a more lasting architectural legacy. Some supporters have pushed for his inclusion on Mount Rushmore, a monument carved into the Black Hills of South Dakota in the 1920s and 1930s, featuring the faces of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. Most recently, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, a Republican from Florida, introduced a bill advocating for Trump's addition, arguing that his remarkable accomplishments for our country and the success he will continue to deliver deserve the highest recognition and honor on this iconic national monument. She punctuated her statement on social media with the rallying cry, "Let's get carving." This is not the first time such a suggestion has been made. Trump himself has joked about it, and past efforts by supporters have included proposals to commission a separate Trump monument in the same grand style. While none of these efforts have materialized, they reveal a lingering desire within the movement to immortalize him in stone, even as his preferred aesthetic remains far more transient. Fascist movements historically placed great emphasis on uniformity, using clothing to project discipline and ideological unity. The black shirts of Mussolini's Italy, the brown shirts of Nazi Germany, and the SS officers all adopted militarized, rigidly styled uniforms that signaled loyalty and order. Even when fascist leaders wore civilian suits, they were impeccably tailored and controlled in appearance, reinforcing an image of precision and command. The fascist uniform was not merely clothing, it was a visual marker of authority and collective strength. MAGA, in contrast, rejects the discipline of uniformity in favour of informal participation. Its most iconic symbol is a red baseball cap, a cheap, mass-produced item that is more reminiscent of a corporate giveaway than a militarised uniform. Trump himself favours ill-fitting suits, often with an exaggeratedly long tie, while his supporters wear everything from camo gear to homemade costumes. Rather than emphasising rigid conformity, MAGA's dress code is open-ended. The movement's aesthetic is not about obedience, but about belonging. Anyone can throw on a red hat and instantly become part of the spectacle. The lack of militarized uniformity reflects MAGA's anti-elitism and its embrace of populist rebellion. This informality extends to Trump's inner circle, which looks nothing like the militarized elites of historical fascist regimes. Mussolini, Hitler, and other authoritarian leaders surrounded themselves with imposing, disciplined figures, whether Nazi officers, Roman-inspired Italian officials, or military strongmen. Their closest advisors projected a polished, ideological extremism that reflected the regime's aesthetic of order and control. Trump's inner circle, by contrast, is a chaotic collection of awkward billionaires, conspiracy theorists, and internet provocateurs. Figures like Elon Musk, Steve Bannon, Rudy Giuliani, and Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, lack the stoic discipline of past authoritarian elites. Many of Trump's closest allies are not polished enforcers, but eccentric businessmen, talk show personalities, and self-styled disruptors. This reflects a fundamental shift in how power operates in the digital age. Rather than consolidating authority through hierarchical discipline, Trump's movement thrives on internet dominance and media spectacle. In place of SS officers or high-ranking party officials, his movement is powered by billionaire trolls, meme lords, viral influencers, and political grifters. The authoritarian aesthetic has moved away from military grandeur and into the realm of online chaos. MAGA is less about totalitarian governance than it is about disruptive, influencer-driven politics. This aesthetic shift is particularly visible in the new wave of young MAGA influencers, who have cultivated a distinct brand of cruelty and elitism. Vanity Fair's article, The Cruel Kids Table, highlights the rise of this next generation, describing figures like Barron Trump, right-wing influencers, and new conservative operatives who reject the boomer populism of MAGA's early days in favour of a slicker, more calculated aesthetic. Unlike the chaotic blue-collar appeal of older MAGA figures, these younger conservatives present themselves as polished, hyper-online, and deeply ironic. They trade in the language of internet nihilism, blending far-right ideology with a detached, smug detachment of wealthy private school kids. This shift reflects a new form of right-wing power, one that embraces aesthetic superiority rather than brute strength. While historic fascists used their inner circles to showcase military discipline, and early MAGA relied on carnival-like rebellion, the new young right seeks to create an exclusive club, one where status is determined by who can be the most ruthless, the most sarcastic, and the most untouchable. Their aesthetic is one of cold cynicism, where politics is less about governance and more about the domination of cultural space. In this sense, they are not simply continuing Trump's legacy, they are refining it into something even more insidious. This emphasis on spectacle is also reflected in the movement's propaganda. Historical fascist regimes were meticulous in their visual storytelling. Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will remains a masterclass in propaganda, using dramatic lighting, choreographed mass gatherings, and heroic imagery to craft a narrative of unity and strength. Even posters and paintings from fascist regimes adhered to the strict aesthetic principles, ensuring that their messages were visually compelling and ideologically consistent. Japanese propaganda art, often in the form of woodblock prints and posters, glorified the emperor as divine, depicted soldiers as noble, and rendered the enemy as weak and pathetic. MAGA, by contrast, embraces meme chaos. Its propaganda is not state-sponsored grandeur, but decentralized, amateurish digital content. Instead of high-production films, the movement thrives on poorly edited Photoshop images, AI-generated depictions of Trump as Rambo, or a divine warrior, and viral conspiracy memes. These images do not need to be well made, they simply need to be spread. This shift reflects how propaganda functions in the modern age. Virality is more powerful than aesthetic cohesion. MAGA's visual culture is not about perfect execution, but about flooding the digital space with content, ensuring that its narrative remains dominant. The chaotic nature of MAGA's aesthetic is most apparent in its rallies. Fascist rallies of the past were meticulously organized and designed to project unity and discipline. During World War II, the Japanese Imperial Army's disciplined formations and ritualized salutes echoed the militarized aesthetics of European fascists, yet the focus remained on the self-sacrifice for the emperor, rather than devotion to an individual dictator. The Nuremberg rallies, with their marching formations, torches, and synchronized salutes, showcase an authoritarian spectacle of order and control. Every movement was choreographed to convey a sense of invincibility. Trump's rallies, on the other hand, are rowdy, unscripted affairs.
What's more fun than a Trump rally? What's more fun? It's true.
His speeches meander, filled with off-the-cuff insults and extended rants. The crowds chant slogans like "lock her up" and engage in call-and-response moments that feel more like a sporting event than a political gathering. Instead of strict formations, attendees wear costumes, wave oversized flags, and embrace a carnival-like atmosphere. Trump rallies do not project disciplined strength, they radiate rebellion and excess. This distinction is crucial in understanding MAGA's aesthetic appeal. While fascist movement use rallies to enforce ideological order, MAGA uses them to create energy and engagement. The power of a Trump rally is not in its militarized discipline, but in its chaotic enthusiasm. The movement thrives not on strict conformity, but on the spectacle of defiance, ensuring that its presence remains loud, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. MAGA's aesthetic rejects the visual discipline of past authoritarian movements in favor of a commercialized spectacle and digital populism. Where historical fascism projected permanence and order, MAGA thrives on constant disruption and virality. This may not look like traditional fascism, but in the age of internet culture and reality TV politics, it may be just as effective.